Welcome to Transformative Principal. I'm your host, Jethro Jones, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. This episode is brought to you by John Catt Educational, a professional development publisher serving as the global leader in combining both research and practice in all materials. Find timely PD publications to support yourself and your faculty by visiting them online at us.johncattbookshop.com. Great instruction gets students engaged. TeachFX equips teachers with the instructional strategies and job-embedded feedback they need to get students engaged in virtual or in-person classes. Learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer at teachfx.com/transformativeprincipal. Welcome to Transformative Principal. This is episode 375, and I am excited to have Anthony Kimpson, or Mr. K, or Professor K, as he is known by his students. He is on a mission to positively impact the lives of every young person he touches and help them aspire to change the direction of their lives through the power of education. He's a dynamic coach, teacher, leader, and speaker with a passion to encourage, empower, mentor, motivate, and educate young people. He believes in breaking down the barriers and excuses often used within his community towards the pursuit of education and higher learning. His philosophy is there is no substitute for education, and he strongly believes the cliche, when you do better, you do better. Finally, Anthony's story is one of courage, determination, and perseverance, as he is a 14-year conqueror of cancer. He has the courage to take a stand for what he believes in, the determination to make a difference, and the perseverance to see it through no matter the obstacle. He is also a professor at two different schools. One is the Ultimate Medical Academy, and the other one is Hillsborough Community College. Tony, welcome to Transformative Principal. So excited to have you on the podcast.
I really appreciate that. Absolutely. I was so excited when you extended the invitation. So I'm here, and hopefully those who hear our message today will be inspired and encouraged.
Yeah, I certainly hope so too. And you and I met because we were part of a diversity panel a few weeks ago that was put on by Deeper Dive Learning and Cloud9. I don't remember the rest of their company name.
Cloud9, Cloud9 Education or something like that. I can't exactly.
Yeah, something like that. No offense, but I can't remember their name. Anyway, it was a great panel. I really enjoyed being there. And part of what I appreciated so much was the thought that went into the questions that were asked. And so many times this conversation about diversity is about putting some people down and lifting others up. And that really made me feel like it was trying to lift everybody up to the highest level they could be. And so I'm going to put links to those diversity panel replays in here so that people can see those. You can get those at the show notes at jethrojones.com/podcast/episode 375. So you can go back and listen to those. We're not going to rehash everything here, but you are an expert in this area of diversity and do a lot to promote it. And where I really want to start, though, is this part in your bio that I just read, that Tony believes in breaking down the barriers and excuses often used within his community towards the pursuit of education and higher learning. And tell me what that means and why that's so important to you.
What it means is, and when having conversations like this, I'm very comfortable having conversations that people would think of as uncomfortable conversations, if you will. But within the Black community, there is a disparaging number in between our white counterparts and those in the Black community as far as education, higher education, and in education in general. And so there's a stigma. I hate to use the word stigma, but there is a mindset, if you will, that we reach a certain level, or when you reach a certain level, our interests go off into other areas and not necessarily in education. And I feel I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm still learning. I'm a learner until the day I die. That's my philosophy. And I want people to know, especially those in the Black community, and education knows no boundaries. I want to make sure that we understand that education is the equalizer, if you will. And when I say education, I don't necessarily mean the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. That's what I tell my students. They get a little chuckle out of it, but just the pursuit of knowledge, okay, in whatever it is that you're doing. If you are doing in education, okay, be the best, strive to go as far as you can go. What are you doing in your communities? Are you empowering those members in your society or in your communities to do better, to fix communities, to not be stagnant where we are? I see a community, I will say a goal of mine, if I'm ever to be able to be in a situation where I see this as a triangle. I'm a sports guy, so I don't know how familiar your followers are of the Chicago Bulls when they won all those championships with Jordan and Phil Jackson. They used a triangle offense, and it was very successful. And no one could penetrate it because it didn't matter. It wasn't set on necessarily a certain set of principles. It really was taking advantage of what was available to you. If we can do that in our societies, look at what's in our societies. If the defense is showing this in a sports term, then we do what we have to do to beat that defense. In the community that I'm speaking of, it's about just empowering and actually striving, breaking down those barriers, those mindsets of we'll be stagnant, and this is as far as we can go. I don't see a limit. That's just, I hope I was able to articulate that. I have a lot in my mind and in my heart when it comes to that. That's the best way that I feel of how I can articulate what that message is to those who want to know.
I really think that's a good way to approach it. And in fact, the book that I wrote, School X, is all about adjusting our schools to meet the needs of the kids that are right in front of us. And so that idea of using the triangle offense to just take whatever the defense gives you, I think is really apt, because I think we need to do that in our schools so that we have a school system that is designed specifically for those in front of us, that takes into account their personalities, their predispositions, their strengths, and their opportunities for growth, and matches them up with opportunities where they're going to be most successful. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the stigma or the mindset that education is only so much, because I agree with you that education is the great equalizer. And I also agree with you that it's not really education, the big E of going to school and getting a certain degree. I don't think that is it specifically, but constantly learning and getting better, I really do think is what makes it so that everybody has the best chance at life possible. And you and I both know highly educated Black people who don't buy into that. And we both know white people who are highly educated and don't buy into that either. But there are people who are in different communities, and certainly not to generalize, but often those communities are poor, and they think that they're not made for education because their parents weren't educated, or their parents don't have a good job, or didn't go to a fancy school. What is your recommendation to people who are in that situation, who feel like the deck is stacked against them? There's no opportunity for them to grow and develop and be better because of where they're from. What do you say in those situations?
That's a great question, and everyone's different. And let me just preface it by saying I want to just make sure that I'm clear on one thing before I answer that question. We are in the United States, and anywhere for that matter, we can identify with different groups. And that's one thing that I don't like labels. I understand. And I'm just looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the facts, the things that I just mentioned about the disparaging numbers in between Black community and our white counterparts is factual. The numbers bear that out. But if we really get down to it, there's only one race in this world, and that's the human race. And that's a whole nother subject. But I want to make sure that we understand that when I speak about doing things, and I use the term my community because I'm Black. Okay, let's keep it real. I'm looking where the need is. So if there is a need in that community, in our community, and that's the reason, that's the one I want to address. So getting back to what do I say to those who have that mindset? I want to come at two fronts. One is, we always say, you hear the term, think outside the box. And what I say, I've learned over the years, and actually I saw this in a movie and it made a lot of sense. So the question then becomes, why is there a box suggests limits already? Why should we come from a standpoint that there is a box in the first place? So I would want to try to break down the box that our minds are in. A lot of those in our community, their mind is that I'm gonna only be as much as I can be, and it is, or I'm only be as much as I'm allowed to be, in those type of mindsets, and that's just outdated. Now, are there barriers or filters, I should say, because barriers you can't get through, filters you can get through. I don't like to use the term barriers. There are filters in our society. Absolutely. Can they be overcome? Absolutely, they can be. So I want to be able to look at one, let's not create a limit for ourselves. Number one, get that mindset of a limit out of your head. Number two, what do you aspire to be? What is there? If you could do anything in the world, everybody has a goal or some type of fantasy, if you will, that they would want to be this or that. What's stopping you? There's the question. What is stopping you from achieving that? And have a serious conversation or a serious reckoning or introspective reckoning with you as an individual, as individuals. So I would look at it from a two-pronged approach, get rid of the limits to begin with. And then what do you aspire to be? If there's something, what's stopping you? And then that will spur on other questions, and then hopefully spur on drive, determination to get to where they would want to be.
In hindsight, for me and you, it sounds like that's a pretty easy thing to do. And it's simple, but I don't know that it's easy, because that mindset issue is really challenging. And so getting rid of the limits, I want to talk about that a little bit first. And I love how you said that there are filters instead of barriers. I think that is such a powerful way to think about it, because all I'm saying is, unless this is in place. And when you think about it like that, then that becomes powerful, because all you got to do is figure out how to trick the filter into letting you pass. And I think that is such a great piece of information, because it recognizes that there is the way I describe it, that there's a game. And if you're in school, you got to learn how to play the game. And what I often said to my students as a principal was, there's a game and you're not playing the game. You are losing the game. So think about this as a game. All right. And the way you win the game is that the way you're winning is you get to do what you want. And especially with our Black students, they would appear more boisterous, loud, bigger than their peers, and would get, singled out for things when they weren't the instigator, but because of preconceived biases, because of whatever, then they got singled out. And so there was this one student who was such a charming young man, but he was in trouble a lot because he was taller, heavier, and louder than everybody else in the school. And so anytime there was commotion, he was singled out, because he was often in the middle of it. He wasn't always doing bad, but he was often in the middle of whatever it was. And I kept saying to him over and over again, look, buddy, you've got to figure out how to play the game. And so if you are loud and yelling in somebody's face, even if you're not mad, but if you're yelling in somebody's face, because of who you are and the way your voice is, you sound really like you're mad. And so you've got to figure out how to laugh at something at the very least, so that people don't think you're angry. And just like a couple little things like that, it didn't take much, but he soon learned how to start playing the game. I'd come around a corner, there'd be commotion, and away, we're all good, Mr. Jones, nothing's happening here. And I'd, of course, go make sure that was the case. But he knew, just because he was loud, he was going to get pinned with stuff. And once he understood that there was a game to be played, he could figure out the game and he could be successful. So talk a little bit about that idea of filtering through, getting rid of the limits, and recognizing that you can be successful no matter what things you may think are holding you back.
Oh, absolutely. And I use the word filter, and I mentor I started mentoring him as a freshman. He's now a senior in high school. And when I first met him and I told him about how there are filters and not barriers. Now, you have to understand what those filters are. Now, are there some issues? Let's keep it real. Are there some issues? And you hit it on the head when you said a lot of the Black students, or some Black students, will get singled out because of probably some preconceived notions or biases. That is a part of life. that I consider a filter. That is one of the things that we need to filter through. So speaking of filters and how a lot of Black students in the numbers are disciplined more so than their white counterparts that do the same things, those filters of those unconscious biases play into that. So how do we navigate that?
Well, the first thing to do is be aware. Now, as a child, obviously, they don't understand all of that. Kids, they don't get it, right? But as an adult, what are we doing? Things like this. Things like having panels, that panel, the diversity panel that we had, that brings awareness to those type of issues. Once you bring awareness to them and show that how a person can have biases and not even know. And one of the other big things about that is a lot of my friends or friends from all walks of life don't understand how, hey, I'm not biased. I have X number of friends, or these friends are Black, or these friends are white. We have been conditioned. Let's just keep it real. When I say we Americans, society, if you will, has been conditioned to think one way for generations. So if we have generations of feeling of certain members of society not being viewed as or being biased against, that's not going to happen or change overnight. That's something that we have to, it's a part of life. And honestly believe this now, and this may sound a little strange, a lot of people and a lot of my white friends don't realize it. And it's not a negative thing that they don't understand. Now, if they knew and then continue, then it's a negative. But once it's brought to your attention, and then you have the knowledge or you have the education aspect to understand what that is, then you might be able to see things differently and then be able to combat those biases, those unconscious biases, and see things from a different light. Those types of things are built in, those filters, those types of things, because they're not barriers. Long gone are the days of barriers, in my opinion. There were, obviously, in our history. I believe that those are gone, but there are filters and so being aware of them, number one, and then talking about them, creating awareness, I think that will allow us to come to a place where we can alleviate or navigate through those filters much easier.
John Catt Educational supports high-quality teaching and learning by providing publications that are research-based, practical, and focused on the key topics proven essential in today's and tomorrow's schools. The latest John Catt publications include a book whose bold, transformative ideas amaze and infuriate people around the world, according to one reviewer, a title from global leaders in curriculum planning, practice, and retrieval, one book that says stop talking and start doing with regard to teacher well-being, and much more. These books, used by educators of all roles across North America and worldwide, amplify fresh, engaging voices with practical strategies to create transformative change. Learn more in our show notes at jethrojones.com/podcast. During COVID, every teacher is a new teacher. That's why innovative school leaders are turning to TeachFX, whose professional learning platform doubles student engagement online or in person. To learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer, visit teachfx.com/transformative principal. Yeah, and so much of what you're talking about is really a mindset issue, Tony. Like, there are filters, and some people may, but you're choosing to say they're not barriers, they're filters. And you're making that decision. And I think that's really important. And sometimes I got a little bit of flack calling my Black students how to, but I really wanted them to be successful. There's a way to be successful with the filters, with people having biases, and there's ways to change people's minds. And I really think that is important. And that's why I appreciate what you're saying so much, because it's about more than just saying something. It's about believing it as well. And you have to believe that you can reach the potential that you want to do, which brings us to the second part of what you're saying, which is, what do you aspire to do? And if you believe from the word go that the whole world is against you and you're never going to be successful, then that's a challenging place to be. But what you're saying is that you can choose to become anything that you want, and you can choose to live your life in a way that you'll be able to do that. So how do you help people understand what they aspire to be, and that what they can be is something more than what they ever thought before?
I think it starts with the individual and questioning the individual, not necessarily questioning them to get information, but questioning them to provoke thought, introspective thought. And what I say by that is I ask not necessarily rhetorical questions, but give you an example of a conversation. I ask more questions, and I tell my students this. That when I go into a classroom, I tell them on day one, I don't answer questions. And they look at me strange and say, "What are you talking about, Professor K? What do you mean?" I said, "I don't answer questions." Now, that is not to say I won't help you find the answer to your questions, but I will not openly give you the answer to questions. And then they get it as we go along, and they slowly get into why I do that, because I'm trying to provoke critical thinking. That's one of the things that I teach. I should say not teach, because I don't consider myself a teacher. I'm a facilitator of learning. That's what I call myself. I facilitate a process of critical thinking and deductive reasoning. In that process, I help students question themselves. And I tell them what my goal is for you. And this is what really gets them. My goal for you is to leave my classroom with more questions than you have answers. Why? Because you're then going to continually seek knowledge. So what I would say to those who have that mindset, and what do I say to them? And after the question of what do you aspire to be, then it's a series of questions. How do you suspect you can get there? I know I probably have to have a degree or something to get me in the door, to get me at the table, whatever. What do you think you need to do to get that? So I'm asking thought-provoking questions that hopefully will take a hold. One of those questions will take a hold, and then they'll take that and run with it. But it has to start small, because if all they see is, wow, I got to do 4 years of school or 2 years of school, and all they see is 4 years, that's not going to work. You can't come from a point of I'm here with 0, and then I got to get 4 years. All they see is 4 years, and that's discouraging. I look at, you said you would like to do this. What will being a EMT do for you? What things can you do with being an EMT? It'll give me self-confidence. It'll give me a sense of accomplishment. Isn't that a great feeling to have? When's the last time you had something that you really felt great about? They'll tell me, and I'll say, you know what? Now, was that a good feeling or what? Oh, that was the best feeling. Don't you want that feeling again? How do you think we can start? What if we did it? And then you start putting those little things in place, and then they can see a path instead of just seeing a big step from here to 4 years. They can see little things, and then by the really get there, those 4 years are gone. And then he got it. So it's breaking it down, and it's just allowing them to be thought-provoking, introspective, and then building those little steps to the bigger picture so they can see it. What it'll look once they're complete.
Yeah, I really like that approach to little steps. That's something that's so powerful. And if you take, the idea of being an EMT, and it may take 4 years before you earn that degree, find out where you can go to learn to become an EMT. That is a lot more manageable than thinking about doing that whole 4 years. And so if you just think of it as little steps that continually build, then it becomes a lot easier to get to that point. And I really like that perspective of how you do that. Now, you teach this at the community college, Hillsborough Community College, and that is a life skills class you mentioned. Tell me what that means and how that's different than a regular class at that school.
Oh, great. I love that class. And I would much rather, I'm qualified to teach a few things. I would much rather do this than student life skills, because I take it very serious and very personal on what I do in my classroom, because it's just that student life skills. There's no book for life. That's the second thing I tell them after I tell them I don't answer questions. There's no book. There's no book. You live it, you experience it, and then you make the best of it, and then you pass on the good things to your kids or siblings or whatever. There's no book. Just there's the only thing that separates, the biggest thing that separates my class from other classes.
we don't deal in absolutes. Life doesn't necessarily deal in absolutes except for death. Okay. And taxes, if some people would say, but math, 2 + 2, no matter what you do, is always absolutely will be 4. Life doesn't work that way. And so I instill that in my students. So when these students come to class, they're new students to college. They're some are older, some are just out of high school. And I get a mix of age groups in there. And they're all wide-eyed because they've never had the college experience. So I tell them or facilitate to them, I provide information. And what we do is each student has a level of knowledge. All of their level of knowledge the levels of knowledge are different, but they all have a base level of knowledge. My whole goal, and I tell them, I'm not a teacher. I'm not here to teach them anything. I'm here to facilitate their learning. They all learn differently, and they all have a knowledge base. So what I do is provide information, and then I allow them to use their experiences to make sense of that information. And once they make sense of it, then it becomes meaningful to them, and then it stays with them, and they can use it as information later on. So we cover a wide range of things. We don't just cover the note-taking and those type of things. We cover stress, the stress of a college student, that maybe that 21-year-old college student who is in a relationship. Maybe that relationship was rocky. They got bills they got to pay. Let's look at what COVID is doing now. The stress of that, the stress of getting that assignment in at the last minute because you stayed up last night because your baby was sick. These are real situations that there's no book for this. So we talk about, and we don't necessarily talk about it, but we exchange ideas and we exchange experiences, and we take a synergistic attitude and create a synergistic atmosphere where we learn from one another. And I become less and less involved as the course goes on. In the beginning, I'm doing everything because they don't know. And so I create an atmosphere where it's their class. And then I still present material, and then they make sense and have conversations and do assignments based on that material. And they come to a consensus or come to an understanding of how this material can help them in their daily life.
And that's a different approach than what traditional courses are like, which are, here's the end goal of where we're at, and here's the tests, assignments that lead up to that. And what you're really modeling, it sounds like, in that is how to live your life. That take the experiences that you've had and try to make sense of whatever situation. Is that a fair summary of what you're?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I tell them, I'm not there to teach them anything. And they looked at me so funny when I tell them that I am there to facilitate their learning. And I really believe that their true learning happens when they can information and it makes to them. Once it makes sense, that's when learning happens. Because tons of times you go into a class, I don't get this. And the learning is not taking place. So that's absolutely right, what you were saying.
So that idea of learning sense to you, really about the deeper kind of learning, because you can learn that 2 + 2 is 4, and you could regurgitate that and parrot that back. But those kinds of skills don't really help you in real life. And certainly an EMT needs to, when this happens, then this is the next thing that I do. But those use cases are very specific, and they don't typically happen. Even teachers, when we have a student in front of us, we can't say, okay, the student isn't getting it, so I need to explain it this specific way, and then magically that'll happen often. And that's, otherwise we'd all teach that way, but it doesn't always work that way. And so you're teaching them how to learn throughout their life. And so you have students who are coming back to college or who are a little bit older. Can you share a story of one student where this was a really impactful time and this approach made their college experience better? I know I'm putting you on the spot with a specific story, but I'm sure you've got a bunch.
I do have a lot, and I'm going to tell you one that happened probably about 2 semesters ago, and it's an excellent story. One of the things that I tell my students on day one as well, there's a lot that goes on day one, a lot. But one of the things I tell them is we're all in here, and we don't know each other, and we are all in our own little comfort zone. Your comfort zone, and I use little levels. I said some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts, and you are at your comfort level. When I make the analogy of show me something that stagnant, meaning it doesn't grow,
Show me something that's stagnant, that doesn't grow, that has blossomed, or I use different terms. I use a tree starts off as a little seed, but it has to crack out of that seed to get to these beautiful, majestic trees that are out there. So I tell them at some point, not today, but at some point, I hope that you make a decision to come a little bit more out of your comfort zone, a little bit more, until the point where you're ready to be out of there and your comfort zone has expanded. So the reason why I tell them that, because right after I tell them that everybody in here is going to give a presentation in front of the class. And then I see the looks and I ask them how many people are a little hesitant or apprehensive. And most of the time I get about 3/4 of the class that raise their hand that they're apprehensive. So then I put them at ease and say, listen, not everyone is going to have to come up here. I will make arrangements for those who are shy. I don't want to put you on the spot. Make arrangements for you to do your presentation one-on-one where no one's in the course. So to make a long story short, young lady, let's call her Kayla, raise her hand right off the bat. I want to do my presentation with you one-on-one. So I set up presentations over the weeks, and some students will come up, some students will do one-on-one. Well, we have been in school for a little while, and I noticed that Kayla was slowly coming out a little bit more, answering more questions, taking a little bit more time in answering her questions. So I said, the presentations were over, the scheduled presentations. He said, now I'm going to go ahead and dismiss everyone so that I can do my one-on-ones. Kayla raised her hand and she said, you know what, Mr. K? No longer, I can't stand or sit in the back of the class and all my life. At some point, I'm going to have to go to the front. She came up to the front and did a bang-up job, a wonderful job. And I use that story all the time. I asked her, could I use it? And she was so great and brilliant, and it did so much for her confidence. After that class, she was doing all kind of things. I literally saw her come from an introvert, broke out of her shell, and then she blossomed the whole time. It does happen. Something like that similarly happens, but not so pronounced as she just made that statement. She can't. And so I use it as a teaching point. What does she mean by she can't sit in the back of class all of her life? What is she saying? What does the class represent in what she was saying? And people give answers. And of course, it means life. In her life, she's made a transformation out of that shell into now she's going to be open and be able to present or live out loud, if you will, a little bit. So that was just an amazing moment. And I will always share that story because it was so powerful.
She could have gotten away with doing that for forever, right? She could have gotten away with just hiding in the back of the class. But what I love about that is that you recognized that she needed a challenge, but she also needed an accommodation to feel like it was safe to. And so if you would have said, everybody's up here no matter what, she would have been dreading it all year long and would not have been happy about it. And it's going to be all right. And I want you to do one thing where you're up in front of everybody, buddy. But if you don't, at the end of the world, it's not going to destroy us, you know? And what I really appreciate is we have to recognize that we think people are ready for something, may not be. And so being able to provide that adaptation to say, here's the baby step, but this is really where I want them, even if it's really challenging, difficult, scary, whatever the case may be. So I just love that part of the story there.
It was great. It was great. It really was. So absolutely.
So in closing, I'd like to ask you, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative principal?
To be a formative principal? You know what I would say? Do something unexpected. I would say do something, show them in the sense of what you were just saying a little bit, show them that you are one of them, or you can be one of them, but do something that might be out of character, not way out, you know what I'm saying, but do something that's out of character that the students will say, they don't necessarily say, oh man, Mr. Jones, he's cool, but wow, what happened? Where did that come from? Because one of the things my grandmother said was, if you're not afraid or being laughed at, you can do anything. Do something out of the ordinary, out of the blue, and the conversation about how what you did can in their struggle or their story. So if you ask me, that's what I would say. This week.
Well, this week, yeah. I think that's a great idea, and definitely something that we all need more of is understanding that we're not alone, that we're not all out there all by ourselves. So I appreciate that. If you'd like to learn more about Tony, you can follow him on Twitter. _Kimpson is his username. You can go follow him there. And I just want to say thank you again to you, Tony, for being part of Transformative Principal. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insight with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thank you to our valued partner, John Catt Educational. If you are a leader looking to make transformative change by providing yourself and your leaders and teachers with professional development that is research-based and rigorous, yet easy to digest and full of practical strategies, check out the latest publications from John Catt. Visit us.johncattbookshop.com to find information on bulk orders or learn much more in our show notes. You can also use the code TRANSFORMATIVE to save a bundle at us.johncattbookshop.com. School principals across the country are using TeachFX's virtual PD and job-embedded feedback to boost student engagement during COVID. With TeachFX, teachers get 8 times more feedback and generate 144% more student engagement on average in a school year with no additional work for school leaders or teachers. To learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer, visit teachfx.com/transformativeprincipal.